The walls of Paris held out against the English onslaught. England's King Edward and the Black Prince abandoned the siege. They marched towards Chartres to try their luck at conquering a less formidable target. But before they could attack, a violent storm hit the army. Killing 1,000 English soldiers in a tempest of hail and freezing winds. To Edward, this Black Monday disaster seemed like divine retribution. A sign that it was time to stop waging war and make peace with France's King Jean. But even as peace between kings was reached, the people of France were still living in bloodshed and turmoil. The French won an overwhelming victory at the Battle of Pontvalin. It was the first time the English had been utterly defeated during the war. But the triumph was short-lived. As England spent the next 60 years amassing French territory through alliances and victories at great battles such as Agincourt. It seemed that nothing could stop England. Who then could have foreseen that a teenaged girl was about to change the course of history? In 1429, France was in dire straits. Nowhere was it more evident than the besieged city of Orléans. The city was completely surrounded by English-held forts. But just a few days' ride away, here in Chinon, there was potential help. The French royal prince, the Dauphin Charles, was holed up in his fortress and under pressure to ride out to save Orléans. As Charles hesitated, a young peasant girl arrived at his court. Her name was Joan d'Arc. She claimed to have received saintly visions, giving her a divine task to help Charles become king and drive the English out of France forever. Charles was skeptical, but was soon convinced of her divinity. And he charged this 17-year-old with the near impossible mission to liberate Orléans. To Jeanne, this was the first step in realizing her God-given destiny. In April 1429, she rode out from Chinon at the head of her army to confront the hated enemy of France. Surrounded by English strongholds, and with its last line of defense under attack, the city of Orléans grew ever more desperate. In France's darkest hour, 17-year-old Jeanne d'Arc arrived with the king's army to liberate a city and prevent the fall of a nation.
Engine, mouvez si seuls engines. Engine, rayez.
Soyez abandonnés.
Avertissez.
Schütz! Chevaucheur, si souhaité. Anjan, vos attendez! Entier! Les commandements! Compagnon! Sitz, compagnon!
Les Tourelles was the linchpin in the English siege of Orléans, blocking the main supply route to the city. If Jeanne d'Arc could capture it, Orléans would finally be liberated. The king's army drove the hated enemy of France from Les Tourelles. With the main road to the city back in French hands, the English abandoned their long siege of Orléans. Celebrating a momentous victory at the head of the French army, Jeanne d'Arc would forever be remembered as the Maid of Orléans. The Battle of Patay was a disaster for the English. The French wiped out their bowmen and drove their forces from the Loire Valley. Now for Jeanne d'Arc and the Dauphin, the way to Reims was clear. The Maid of Orléans rode with the Dauphin through the streets and was at his side when he was finally crowned King Charles VII of France. But less than 2 years later, Jeanne was captured in battle, sold to the English, and put on trial for heresy. She spent 6 months locked in a dungeon, awaiting her fate. King Charles, who owed his crown to Jeanne, did nothing to help win her freedom. She was found guilty. On May 30th, 1431, Jeanne d'Arc was brought here, to the old market square in Rouen, where she was burned at the stake. She was 19 years old. But what the Maid of Orléans started could not be denied. Her victories were the first in a chain of successes for France's military. Liberty was within reach. Thanks to the leadership of 2 brothers, Jean and Gaspard Bureau, the French army became experts in the use of artillery, transforming it into a disciplined, modern fighting force. In 1448, King Charles was ready to make a major move against the English. He vowed to retake Normandy.
J'obéirai. Dicte-nous quelqu'un traîne à battre. Nous avons les conseils durés dans ce siège. Envoyez. Un bis pour votre transposez-vous et pour vous tout à fait.
The French received word that their Breton allies had arrived with their knights and horsemen. Now the 2 armies could coordinate.
Ainsi soit-il.
The Bretons saw an opportunity to attack the English from the back.
Le champ nous attend. Si le fait à tout petit.
As the Bretons attacked, the English had no choice but to pivot their front line, opening their flanks to attack from the French.
Nos gars avant et sans mêler. Juste est notre cause, chevalier. C'est un honneur. Paix, compagnons. Si les commandements.
Nous avons écuré l'engin de siège. Envoyé.
Paix, soudain.
Ainsi soit-il.
Soudain. Et ici de nouvelles commandements.
Advise pour votre engin. Nous les allons foudroyer. Dites-nous quel quintaine à battre.
Beset by the French and Bretons, the English beat a hasty retreat toward Formigny.
Si le fait à tout petit. En bas les criez bas.
The English survivors entered Formigny. The French would have to take this town to secure victory.
Advise pour votre engin. Nous accomplissons vos ordonnances. Les engins de siège sont prêts. Ainsi sera fait. Paix. Paix ici les commandements. Quoi ne faille votre trait.
Causez-vous. Aux armes.
Quasi
Nous actons. Ce sera pour les avant un sommet, compagnons. Ne clamez pas.
sécurez l'engin de siège. Envoyez les engins. Envoyez. Suivez l'artillerie. Dites-nous quel quintaine à battre. Envoyez ces ruinements. Tout est ordonné. Les engins de siège sont prêts.
Nous attendons vos commandements. Reste sous pour la bataille.
Dites-nous quel quintaine à battre.
Recette de bataille suisse victorieux.
With the last English army destroyed and the gates of Formigny thrown open, the French force in Normandy was victorious. Their well-organized forces and superior firepower had brought the arduous 100 Years' War closer to its conclusion. At Formigny, the roar of cannon fire sounded the death knell for England's ambitions in France. King Charles and the Bureau brothers did not let up on the offensive, and in 1453, the English retreated across the Channel. France was finally at peace. More than 100 years had passed since the first English chevauchés had scorched the land. The iconic French knights who fought in those early days would not have recognized their own military a century later. The English longbow, once the scourge of France, was no match for French artillery in the last years of the war. And by 1453, France's border looked very different, growing to encompass territories once claimed by England and their allies. After enduring a century of conflict, France emerged as a transformed nation. The country and its people had persevered and unified into a kingdom that could defend itself. Against all odds, France had won the 100 Years' War.